The humid Manila evening air hung thick over Malate district as Officer Ramon de la Cruz adjusted his uniform outside a busy convenience store. At 32 years old, Ramon had served the Philippine National Police for 8 years with an unblemished record, a rarity in a system where corruption often felt like an unspoken requirement. His radio crackled. Routine patrol, nothing unusual. That's when the black SUV rolled up. The vehicle screeched to a halt in a clearly marked no parking zone, blocking the pedestrian crossing. Ramon approached professionally, notebook in hand. As he neared the driver's window, he noticed the U.S. military base parking sticker. The door swung open, and out stepped Staff Sergeant Mike Davidson, a 28-year-old American soldier stationed at the nearby military facility. His uniform was crisp, his jaw set with entitlement. The smell of alcohol was unmistakable. "Evening, sir," Ramon said, in clear English, his tone respectful but firm. "You're parked in a restricted zone. I'll need to see your license and registration." Davidson laughed, not a friendly laugh, but one dripping with contempt. "You're joking, right? Do you know who I am? I'm U.S. military. I have diplomatic immunity." Ramon remained calm. He'd dealt with this attitude before. "Sir, the parking violation still applies. It's a 500 peso fine, or you can move your vehicle now." 500 pesos? He sneered, pulling out his wallet. He extracted a crisp 1,000 peso bill and dangled it in front of Ramon's face. "Here, take it. Keep the change, and we forget this ever happened." The street seemed to hold its breath. Ramon looked at the money, then directly into Davidson's eyes. "Sir, I cannot accept that. If you'd like to pay the official fine, I can issue you a citation. Otherwise, please move your vehicle." Davidson's face flushed red. "What? You're too good for American money? You Filipino cops are all the same. You want bribes? Just say it. Don't play games with me." "I'm not playing games, sir. I'm doing my job." "Your job?" Davidson's voice rose, attracting attention from passers-by. "Your job is to take money and look the other way. That's what you people do, isn't it?" Ramon's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "You're going to have to ask me nothing." Davidson shoved the money at Ramon's chest. "Take it." "No, sir." What happened next would change both their lives forever. Davidson's face twisted with rage. In his intoxicated mind, this Filipino officer had disrespected him, disrespected America itself. He grabbed Ramon by the collar. "You think you're better than me?" Davidson snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You're nothing. You're a nobody in a nobody country." Ramon tried to de-escalate. "Sir, please calm down. There's no need for—" The first punch came without warning. Davidson's fist connected with Ramon's jaw, snapping his head sideways. The officer stumbled backward, his vision blurring. Before he could recover, Davidson was on him, fists flying in a drunken fury. "I serve my country," Davidson screamed with each blow. "You will respect me." Ramon tried to defend himself, but Davidson was larger, and the surprise attack had given him the advantage. The American soldier drove Ramon against the convenience store wall, fists pounding into his ribs, his face, his shoulders. Bystanders screamed. Someone shouted for help. "Stop! Stop!" a woman cried out. But Davidson didn't stop. Years of perceived superiority, military aggression, and alcohol-fueled entitlement poured out in those savage seconds. He grabbed Ramon's head and slammed it against the concrete wall. Once. Twice. Ramon collapsed to the ground, blood streaming from a gash above his eye, his nose broken, his uniform torn and stained red. Davidson stood over him, chest heaving, fists still clenched. "That's what happens when you disrespect an American soldier," he spat. Then he kicked Ramon once more in the ribs, a final assertion of dominance, before staggering back to his SUV and speeding away. The crowd rushed to Ramon's side. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else was filming. And in the back of that crowd, a distinguished man in an expensive barong Tagalog stood frozen, his phone in his hand, his face a mask of controlled fury. His name was Attorney Lorenzo Reyes, and he had just witnessed everything. Attorney Lorenzo Reyes was not just any lawyer. At 55 years old, he was one of Manila's most successful and wealthiest attorneys, known for taking on impossible cases and winning them. He'd built his fortune representing corporations and politicians, but he'd never forgotten where he came from, the slums of Tondo, where corruption and abuse of power were daily realities. As he watched the ambulance take Officer De La Cruz away, something inside Lorenzo snapped. He'd seen the entire assault. He'd seen the bribe attempt, the refusal, and the savage beating that followed. And he'd seen something else, something that reminded him of his own father, a police officer who'd been murdered 30 years ago for refusing to work with drug syndicates. He made a decision right there on that blood-stained sidewalk. He would take this case, pro bono, all the way. The next morning, Lorenzo arrived at the hospital where Officer De La Cruz was recovering. His face was swollen beyond recognition, his left eye completely shut, his jaw wired. 3 broken ribs, severe concussion. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. Ramon's wife, Maria, sat beside the bed, eyes red from crying. Their 2 young children, ages 5 and 7, stood confused and frightened at the doorway. Lorenzo introduced himself quietly. "Officer De La Cruz, my name is Attorney Lorenzo Reyes. I witnessed what happened to you last night." Ramon tried to speak, but pain shot through his jaw. "Don't talk," Lorenzo said gently. "Just listen. I know you refused to bribe. I know you were doing your job with honor.
And I know that American soldier nearly killed you for it." He paused, his voice hardening. "I want to represent you. I want to sue Staff Sergeant Mike Davidson. I want to take him to court and make sure he faces justice, real justice." Maria's eyes widened. "Attorney, we can't afford." Lorenzo raised his hand. "This won't cost you a single peso. This is personal now." "But he's American military," Maria whispered. "They'll protect him. They always do." Lorenzo's eyes flashed. "Not this time. Not if I have anything to say about it." Lorenzo didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he'd assembled a team of investigators, secured copies of the convenience store's security footage, obtained witness statements from 7 bystanders, and filed a criminal complaint with both Philippine and U.S. military authorities. The evidence was overwhelming. The video showed everything: Davidson's aggressive approach, the bribe attempt, Ramon's professional refusal, and the brutal assault that followed. It also captured audio, Davidson's slurs about Filipinos, his claims of superiority, his complete disregard for Philippine law. But Lorenzo knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The U.S. military had a long history of protecting its personnel from local prosecution, citing the Visiting Forces Agreement, a treaty that often allowed American soldiers to escape accountability for crimes committed on Philippine soil. Lorenzo needed more than evidence. He needed public pressure. He called a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and curious onlookers. Lorenzo stood at the podium, Ramon beside him in a wheelchair, face still bandaged. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lorenzo began, his voice calm but commanding, "what you're about to see is not just an assault. It's a symbol of something much deeper, the question of whether justice applies equally to everyone, regardless of nationality or military status." He played the video. The room fell silent as they watched Davidson beat Ramon mercilessly. Gasps echoed. Someone sobbed. When it ended, Lorenzo continued. "Officer Ramon de la Cruz refused to bribe because he believes in the law. He was beaten nearly to death because he chose honor over corruption. And now, Staff Sergeant Mike Davidson sits comfortably on a U.S. military base protected by treaties and diplomatic immunity, while this Filipino hero recovers in a hospital bed his family can barely afford." He leaned into the microphone. "I'm here to say, not this time. We're filing charges, we're demanding extradition, and we're going to fight this case all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to." The press conference went viral within hours. Hashtag Justice for Officer Ramon trended on social media. Protests erupted outside the U.S. Embassy. International media picked up the story. The pressure was mounting. The U.S. military's response was swift and predictable. Staff Sergeant Davidson would be subject to internal military justice proceedings, but not Philippine criminal courts. The Visiting Forces Agreement, they argued, granted him immunity from local prosecution. Lorenzo expected this. He'd been preparing for it. He filed a motion challenging the constitutionality of the VFA provision that allowed foreign soldiers to escape accountability for violent crimes against Filipino citizens. He argued that such immunity violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Philippine Constitution and undermined national sovereignty. The case drew attention from international human rights organizations. Amnesty International issued a statement. The UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings weighed in. Meanwhile, Davidson remained on the military base, confident he'd escape serious consequences. His lawyer, provided by the U.S. military, issued a statement claiming the incident was a regrettable misunderstanding and that Davidson had acted in self-defense. Lorenzo demolished that defense with the video evidence. The preliminary hearings began. Lorenzo presented his case with surgical precision. Davidson's blood alcohol level that night, twice the legal limit. Witness testimonies describing his aggressive behavior. Medical reports showing the extent of Ramon's injuries. And most damning of all, the security footage showing an unprovoked attack on an unarmed officer performing his duty. The judge, a respected veteran of the Philippine judiciary, watched the video 3 times. "Attorney Reyes," she said finally, "you've made a compelling case, but you understand the jurisdictional challenges here." "I do, Your Honor, but I believe justice transcends jurisdiction. If we allow foreign nationals, even military personnel, to brutalize our citizens without consequence, we're saying Filipino lives don't matter. We're saying our sovereignty is negotiable." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge banged her gavel. "Order! This court will take a recess to consider the arguments presented." Behind the scenes, Lorenzo worked another angle. He reached out to progressive members of the Philippine Senate who'd long questioned the fairness of the Visiting Forces Agreement. He provided them with documentation of dozens of similar cases where U.S. military personnel had committed crimes and escaped prosecution. A Senate hearing was called. Lorenzo testified, Ramon beside him. The officer's face had healed somewhat, but the scars, physical and emotional, remained. "Senators," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing through the chamber, Officer Ramon de la Cruz represents everything we say we value: integrity, honor, service. He refused corruption, he upheld the law. And for that, he was beaten within an inch of his life by a man who believed his American uniform made him untouchable. He paused, looking each senator in the eye. Are we a sovereign nation, or are we a colonial outpost where foreigners can brutalize our citizens with impunity?
The political pressure became unbearable. The U.S. Embassy, facing massive protests and international scrutiny, made a calculated decision. They would waive Davidson's immunity and allow him to face trial in Philippine courts. It was unprecedented. Lorenzo had won the first major battle. The trial of Staff Sergeant Mike Davidson became the most watched legal proceeding in Philippine history. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. International media camped outside. The proceedings were broadcast live. Davidson sat at the defense table in civilian clothes, his military bearing gone, replaced by something close to fear. His lawyer tried various defenses: PTSD, cultural misunderstanding, temporary insanity, but none held water against the evidence. Lorenzo's case was airtight. He called witness after witness: the convenience store owner who saw everything, the bystanders who heard Davidson's racist slurs, the doctor who treated Ramon's injuries, and finally, Ramon himself. The officer took the stand, his voice still slightly impaired from his injuries. "Mr. de la Cruz," Lorenzo asked gently, "why didn't you just take the money?" Ramon looked directly at the jury. "Because I took an oath to serve and protect, to uphold the law. If I take bribes, I'm not a police officer. I'm just another criminal in uniform." His voice grew stronger. "My children were watching me that day in a way. I wanted them to grow up in a country where doing the right thing matters, where honor means something." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Davidson's lawyer tried to discredit Ramon, suggesting he'd provoked the attack, but the video evidence made such claims ridiculous. In his desperation, the defense attorney made a fatal mistake. He suggested that Ramon should have just accepted the bribe to avoid trouble. Lorenzo pounced. "So your defense is that Officer de la Cruz deserved to be beaten because he refused corruption? That's your argument?" The defense lawyer stammered. "No, I'm just saying, you're saying that integrity deserves punishment, that honor is a crime, that refusing a bribe justifies attempted murder." He turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, that's not a defense. That's an admission." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The deliberation took 4 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, attempted bribery, violation of civil rights. The courtroom exploded in cheers. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. The judge, the same veteran jurist who'd presided over the preliminary hearings, looked at Davidson with unmistakable contempt. "Staff Sergeant Davidson," she began, "you came to this country as a guest, supposedly representing the values of justice and democracy. Instead, you embodied the worst kind of arrogance and prejudice. You attempted to corrupt a law enforcement officer. When he refused, you nearly killed him, not in the heat of passion, but in calculated rage fueled by a sense of superiority and entitlement." She paused, reviewing her notes. "The evidence shows you believed you were above Philippine law, that your uniform made you untouchable, that this officer, this Filipino hero, was beneath you." Her voice hardened. "This court will show you how wrong you were." The sentence came down like thunder. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole for 40 years. Additionally,
Davidson was dishonorably discharged from the U.S. military, losing all benefits, rank, and honors. His military career, which he'd valued above all else, was destroyed. Ramon sat in the gallery, tears streaming down his face. His wife squeezed his hand. Their children didn't fully understand, but they knew their father had won something important. Lorenzo stood beside them, satisfaction written on his face. He'd won many cases in his career, earned millions, gained fame and respect, but this felt different. This felt like redemption. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. "Attorney Reyes," one shouted, "you took this case pro bono and spent nearly $1 million pesos of your own money on this prosecution. Why?" Lorenzo stopped, looked at Ramon, then back at the cameras. "Because some things are more valuable than money. Officer Ramon de la Cruz showed me something I'd almost forgotten in my years of corporate law, that integrity still exists, that honor still matters, that there are still Filipinos willing to sacrifice everything for principle." He smiled. He reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place. To fight for justice, real justice, not just for those who can afford it, but for those who deserve it. He put his hand on Ramon's shoulder. This man could have taken that bribe. His life would have been easier, safer, but he chose the hard path, the right path, and I'll be damned if I let anyone punish him for that. The crowd erupted in applause. 6 months later, Officer Ramon de la Cruz returned to duty. His story had made him a national hero, but he insisted he was just doing his job. The Philippine National Police instituted new anti-corruption protocols, using Ramon's case as a training example. Attorney Lorenzo Reyes established a foundation offering free legal representation to law enforcement officers who face retaliation for refusing corruption. He called it the Integrity Defense Fund. Staff Sergeant Mike Davidson serves his sentence in New Bilibid Prison, a stark fall from his position of power and privilege. His case became a landmark precedent, cited in dozens of subsequent prosecutions of foreign nationals who believed they were above Philippine law. And in households across the Philippines, parents tell their children the story of the police officer who said no to corruption and the lawyer who made sure that integrity was rewarded, not punished. Because in the end, justice isn't about nationality or rank or military might. It's about doing what's right, no matter the cost. And on that humid Manila evening, both Ramon de la Cruz and Lorenzo Reyes proved that sometimes one person's courage can change everything.